Welcome to Arrow News Channel. Like and subscribe to update news around the world. During President Donald Trump's first State of the Union address, there really wasn't much both the Republicans and Democrats decided to stand for in applause. But there was one phrase in the speech where both sides stood. Both sides stood in applause after President Trump said this: "All of us, together, as one team, one people, and one American family can do anything. We all share the same home, the same heart, the same destiny, and the same great American flag." Both sides stood, except the possible 2020 Democrat presidential candidate, that is, the senator from Vermont, and the 2016 Democrat Party runner-up, Bernie Sanders, decided the flag and America weren't good enough reasons to stand and applaud. Even though, as you can see in the video and picture, even the new senator from the loony state of California, Kamala Harris, proudly stood to applaud. The fact that the Democrat Party also let a self-professed socialist dinosaur run under their banner tells us all we need to know about that side. How did we go from a time where communists and socialists were persecuted by the likes of Senator McCarthy to having a candidate run as a Democrat who is a socialist is beyond me. Whatever the reason, socialism now seems to be okay in America, and it needs to stop. After the Second World War, our colleges and universities were infiltrated by communists from the Cold War era. When someone like McCarthy was brave enough to call them to task over their invasion of Hollywood, which led to the Marxist takeover of pop culture, he was vilified on his investigation. That took merit and was branded as nothing more than a witch hunt. Today we don't have McCarthy to tell us, but we do have people waking up thanks to the resounding win by President Trump. Today we don't have Senate inquiries, which would have thrown Senator Sanders in jail. We do have information and citizen journalists. We also can boycott what isn't American and doesn't prescribe to our values as freedom-loving Americans, which can be even more effective than any inquiry, don't you agree? Via the New York Post. Don't be fooled by Bernie Sanders, he's a diehard communist. While attending the University of Chicago, Sanders joined the Young People's Socialist League, the youth wing of the Socialist Party USA. He also organized for a communist front, the United Packing House Workers Union, which at the time was under investigation by the House Committee on Un-American Activities. After graduating with a political science degree, Sanders moved to Vermont, where he headed the American People's History Society, an organ for Marxist propaganda. There, he produced a glowing documentary on the life of socialist revolutionary Eugene Debs, who was jailed for espionage during the Red Scare and hailed by the Bolsheviks as America's greatest Marxist. This subversive hero of Sanders, denounced even by liberal Democrats as a traitor, bashed the barons of Wall Street and hailed the triumphant Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Those Russian comrades of ours have made greater sacrifices, have suffered more, and have shed more heroic blood than any like number of men and women anywhere on earth, Debs proclaimed. They have laid the foundation of the first real democracy that ever drew the breath of life in this world. In a 1918 speech in Canton, Ohio, Debs reaffirmed his solidarity with Lenin and Trotsky, despite clear evidence of their violent plunder and treachery. Sanders still hangs a portrait of Debs on the wall in his Senate office. In the early 70s, Sanders helped found the Liberty Union Party, which called for the nationalization of all U.S. banks and the public takeover of all private utility companies. Mainstreaming Sanders requires whitewashing his radical pro-communist past. It won't be easy to do. After failed runs for Congress, Sanders in 1981 managed to get elected mayor of Burlington, Vermont, where he restricted property rights for landlords, set price controls and raised property taxes to pay for communal land trusts. Local small businesses distributed flyers complaining their new mayor does not believe in free enterprise. His radical activities didn't stop at the water's edge. Sanders took several goodwill trips not only to the USSR, but also to Cuba and Nicaragua, where the Soviets were trying to expand their influence in our hemisphere. In 1985, he traveled to Managua to celebrate the rise to power of the Marxist-Leninist Sandinista government. He called it a heroic revolution. Undermining anti-communist U.S. policy, Sanders denounced the Reagan administration's backing of the Contra rebels in a letter to the Sandinistas. His betrayal did not end there. Sanders lobbied the White House to stop the proxy war and even tried to broker a peace deal. He adopted Managua as a sister city and invited Sandinista leader Daniel Ortega to visit the U.S. He exalted Ortega as an impressive guy, while attacking President Reagan. The Sandinista government has more support among the Nicaraguan people, substantially more support, than Ronald Reagan has among the American people, Sanders told Vermont Government Access TV in 1985. Sanders also adopted a Soviet sister city outside Moscow and honeymooned with his second wife in the USSR. He put up a Soviet flag in his office, shocking even the Birkenstock-wearing local liberals. At the time, the evil empire was on the march around the world, and threatening the U.S. with nuclear annihilation. Then, in 1989, as the West was on the verge of winning the Cold War, Sanders addressed the National Conference of the U.S. Peace Council, a known front for the Communist Party USA, whose members swore an oath not only to the Soviet Union but to the triumph of Soviet power in the U.S. Today, Sanders wants to bring what he admired in the USSR, Cuba, Nicaragua and other communist states to America. For starters, he proposes completely nationalizing our healthcare system and putting private health insurance and drug companies out of business. He also wants to break up big banks and control the energy industry, while providing free college tuition, a living wage and guaranteed home ownership and jobs through massive public works projects. Price tag, $18 billion. Who will pay for it all? You will. Sanders plans to not only soak the rich with the 90% plus tax rate, while charging Wall Street a speculation tax, but hit every American with a global warming tax. Of course, even that wouldn't cover the cost of his communist schemes. President Sanders would eventually soak the middle class he claims to champion. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need, right? Former mayoral advisors from Burlington defend their old boss. They note that Sanders was never a member of the Communist Party and deny he was even a small c communist, even while acknowledging he named their city softball squad the People's Republic of Burlington and the town's minor league baseball team the Vermont Reds. What about those communist sister cities he adopted? Bernie established them to support people-to-people exchanges which might support peace in the long run, said Bruce Cipher, who was one of Sanders' central economic planners directing Burlington businesses to reinvest their profits in the community. In an interview, Cipher claimed that it was no different than President Nixon opening relations with China. Please. Sanders and his Sanderistas are all still pining for what Debs called the greater revolution yet to come. What's revolting is how this hardcore commies campaign has gotten this far. With his ascendancy in both Iowa and New Hampshire, Sanders is no longer just a fool, he's now a dangerous fool. While it may be hard to hate the old codger, it's easy, and virtuous, to hate his un-American ideas. They should be swept into the dustbin with the rest of communist history.